The twin suns of Halvorn burned red over the city of steel. Heat shimmered over the dusty ground as smoke rose from hundreds of stalls. The slave market was alive, filled with shouting, laughter, and pain. Creatures from across the galaxy crowded the narrow lanes, buying and selling lives like they were pieces of metal. Drake Walker moved through the chaos with his hands deep in his jacket pockets. His boots were worn, his clothes dusty from travel, and his eyes tired from too many days without sleep. Once he had been a cargo pilot, flying across systems, delivering goods for the Union fleet. But war had ended, jobs had vanished, and he had lost everything. Now he was just another drifter searching for purpose. He wasn't looking to buy anyone. He wasn't even looking to stay. His ship, the Sparrow, sat grounded in a scrapyard just outside the city. Its reactor was dying, and the mechanic wanted 900 credits to fix it. Drake had that much, barely, but after paying he'd have nothing left for food, fuel, or even a bed. Still, he wandered through the market, drawn by something he couldn't explain. The air was thick with strange smells: oil, burnt meat, fear. He walked past cages filled with alien slaves, scaly, feathered, and furred. Some begged. Some stared blankly at the ground. Others didn't even move. Drake tried not to look, tried not to feel. He had seen too much suffering in the war already. But then he heard it, a soft, broken sound. A small whimper, like a child crying into the dark. Drake stopped. His instincts turned his head toward a corner stall covered in a dirty tarp. The vendor was a bulky alien with gray skin and yellow eyes. Beside him stood a cage made of thick metal bars. "Hey," Drake said, stepping closer. "What's in there?" The alien merchant grinned. "Curious, human? Come look, fresh stock, Falari species. Hard to find these days." Drake pulled the tarp back and froze. Inside the cage, 3 small figures sat huddled together. They were thin, weak, their fur matted with dirt. Their eyes, wide and bright, reflected both fear and exhaustion. They looked almost human, except for the fur-covered ears on their heads, soft tails wrapped around their knees, and faint markings on their skin. Cat-like, but more fragile. More real. The merchant laughed when he saw Drake's expression. "Not bad, eh? They're called cat girls. Half beasts, half pretty. People used to keep them as pets or dancers. But now," he leaned closer and tapped the cage, "they're better as meat." Drake's heart twisted. "Meat?" he repeated, his voice low. "Of course," the alien said casually. "High protein. Good flavor. Rich buyers love exotic taste. We sell by the kilo. You want one? I can give discount." Drake stared at the cage, unable to speak. The smallest girl, her fur pale gray, her eyes blue like frost, looked up at him. Her lips trembled. "Please," she whispered in a soft voice that barely reached him. "Help!" The word hit him like a punch. He looked around. No one cared. People walked past, laughing, bargaining, shouting. To them, this was normal. Just business. Drake took a step closer to the cage. "How long have they been here?" The merchant shrugged. 3 days, no buyers. Too weak to work. No one wants useless animals. That word made something inside Drake snap. He had seen soldiers call prisoners animals before burning their villages. He had seen cruelty dressed as order. He had promised himself he would never stand by again. His hands tightened into fists. He didn't have a plan, but he couldn't walk away. The merchant noticed the look in his eyes. "You want one?" "I said I give you discount. The small one's weak, half price." Drake's jaw clenched. "How much for all of them?" The merchant blinked, then laughed loudly. "All 3? You rich human." Drake checked his wrist chip. It showed the number glowing faintly, 900 credits. Everything he had left. Everything he'd saved. "I'll take them all," he said quietly. The merchant stared, then grinned wider. "You serious?" "That's all your money," Drake nodded. "Transfer it now." A few moments later, the cage door opened. The girls stepped out slowly, their legs shaking, their eyes wide with disbelief. The smallest one tried to speak, but only tears came. Drake didn't know what to say. He just looked at them and said softly, "You're free now." As they followed him through the burning market, the alien vendor laughed behind them. Stupid human. Bought meat with his last credits. Drake didn't turn back. He didn't care what anyone thought. He had no money, no plan, no home. But as he looked at the 3 fragile figures walking beside him, something stirred deep in his chest, something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Drake led the 3 cat girls out of the slave market into the narrow streets of Halvorn. Dust swirled around their feet and the red suns cast long shadows behind them. The girls walked cautiously, their small paws making soft taps against the metal ground. They didn't speak at first. Their eyes darted to every corner, every passing alien, every loud shout. Fear clung to them like a second skin. Drake felt a pang of guilt. He had saved them, yes, but he had no plan. No shelter, no food, not even fuel to move his broken ship. Where are we going? The tallest girl finally asked, her silver fur trembling slightly. Drake paused, looking down at her. Her eyes were wide with caution and confusion. He sighed. Somewhere safe. For now. The smallest girl, Neo, with gray fur and bright blue eyes, clung to the taller one's arm. She whispered, almost to herself, I thought I'd die there. Drake's chest tightened. That single sentence carried more weight than he could carry himself. He had spent his last credits, risked arrest, risked his life. And for what? Strangers. But in that moment, their trust, fragile as it was, made every risk feel worth it. The third fiery, orange-furred girl, Tessa, kept her eyes on Drake. Her tail twitched in irritation and caution. Why you help us? She demanded, her voice sharper than the other two. Drake paused. He didn't know why. There was no profit, no logic, no benefit. Because someone should have, he said finally. And no one else was going to. Tessa's ears flattened. She didn't answer, but her eyes softened just a fraction. They walked in silence until they reached the outskirts of the city, where the scrapyard waited like a forgotten graveyard. The Sparrow, Drake's ship, lay half buried in sand and rust. Its engines were dark, its hull scarred from years of neglect. Drake ran a hand along the side, feeling the cold metal beneath his fingers. The girls approached cautiously, noses twitching as they sniffed the air. It's strange, Neo murmured. Not like the cages. Drake laughed softly, though it was hollow. Yeah, it's mine. Well, it used to be mine. Now it's just home for a while. They stepped inside. The smell of old machinery and fuel filled their noses. The interior was cramped and dim, but it was shelter. Tessa inspected the walls, tail flicking nervously. It's ours now? Drake shrugged. For tonight, tomorrow, we'll see. Night came quickly on Halvern, and the three girls curled together on the floor with the small blanket Drake had. He sat near the door, his back against the hull, staring at the stars above the scrapyard's fence. He hadn't expected gratitude, but he had expected fear, suspicion, maybe anger. Instead, there was quiet trust, small, fragile, but real. You don't eat? Neo asked after a long silence. Drake shook his head. I'll be fine, he said. You need it more. She hesitated, then nibbled at the ration bar he gave her. Tessa sat nearby, arms crossed, but she too ate carefully. Leary, the tallest, simply watched, her hands folded on her lap, observing everything. After a while, the girls began to speak softly to each other. Drake listened but didn't interrupt. He didn't need to. Their murmurs, small and hesitant, were enough to make the scrapyard feel alive. At one point, Neo reached out, touching his sleeve with her tiny paw. Thank you, she whispered. Drake swallowed hard, unsure what to say. Years of war, of betrayal, of losing people he cared about, had left him empty. And yet these small beings, fragile and terrified, had given him something in return. A purpose. A reason to care again. He looked out the small viewport at the twin suns dipping below the horizon. The heat faded, replaced by the chill of night. The city lights glimmered in the distance, indifferent, uncaring. Out here in the scrapyard, it was just them. 3 alien girls and a human who had nothing but the will to protect them. Drake leaned back and closed his eyes, letting exhaustion take him. But in his dreams, he didn't see stars or warships. He saw their faces, small, hopeful, alive. And he made a silent promise to himself. Even if the universe tried to tear it apart, I will keep them safe. No matter what. Outside, the scrapyard was quiet, but Drake knew it wouldn't stay that way. Someone had sold those girls. Someone would want them back. And soon, but for now, the night was theirs. And for the first time in years, Drake felt something that hadn't been in his heart for a long time. Hope. Night had settled over the scrapyard, and the twin moons of Halvern cast pale light across the rusted metal and sand. Inside the cramped hull of the Sparrow, the 3 cat girls huddled together on the floor, wrapped in the small blanket Drake had given them. Their small bodies trembled not only from the cold but from lingering fear. Fear of humans, fear of the universe, fear of being hunted again. Drake sat near the door, knees drawn to his chest, staring at the dim console lights. His hands were scratched from working on the ship, and his face was streaked with sweat and dust. He wanted to be asleep, to close his eyes and forget the chaos outside, but he couldn't. Not when 3 fragile lives depended on him. "Do you sleep here?" Neo whispered. Her small paw reached out to touch the cold floor as if testing it. Her voice was trembling, small, but Drake heard the courage in it too. "Yes," he said softly. "For now. It's safe inside." Tessa, sitting opposite them, flicked her tail with irritation. "Safe?" she repeated, her sharp eyes narrowing. "We could be sold again tomorrow. Or worse." Drake looked at her, meeting her gaze. "I'll stop that from happening," he said simply. The words felt heavier than he expected. It wasn't just a promise, it was a vow. The silver-furred Leary spoke quietly, her voice calm but cautious. Why help us? You don't know us." "You could just leave," Drake swallowed. He didn't have a good answer. He only knew that years of seeing people suffer, of losing friends, of watching cruelty go unchecked, had left a scar in his chest. Helping these girls. It was reckless, foolish, and dangerous. But it felt like the only thing left in him that was human. "Because someone should," he said finally, his voice low but steady. "And no one else will." Silence filled the cabin after that. Neo nestled closer to Leary, her small body shaking. Tessa's tail twitched, but she didn't argue further. Only the soft hum of the ship's minimal power broke the stillness. Drake reached into his bag and pulled out the last of his ration bars. He handed pieces to the girls. "Eat. You need it more than I do." They ate slowly, uncertain at first, then a little faster as hunger won over caution. The smallest one, Neo, glanced at him while chewing and whispered, "You don't eat?" "I'm fine," Drake replied. "I've been alive longer than you think." He tried to make it sound casual, but Neo's eyes, wide and innocent, pierced through his facade. For the first time in years, Drake felt something stir inside him, a fragile warmth he hadn't known he'd lost. Protecting them, feeding them, even just sitting with them, it made him feel alive. Their trust, though hesitant and wary, was slowly weaving its way into his heart. Hours passed. The girls began to whisper to each other, small broken conversations that Drake only partially understood. They spoke of the cages, the markets, the voices of people who treated them like objects. He listened quietly, letting them vent, letting them heal. Finally, Neo stretched her small limbs and reached for Drake's sleeve. Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, but it carried weight. He didn't respond. He just nodded slightly, letting her know he heard her. Leary, always quiet, watched him carefully. There was curiosity in her eyes now, mingled with something he hadn't expected. Trust. She leaned forward, resting her hands on her knees. "You risked everything," she said softly. "Why?" Drake looked at her. He didn't have a complete answer. He only knew that the world had given him nothing, and yet in this moment he could give something. "Because it's the right thing," he said finally. The girls fell silent again, curling into the blanket as the night grew colder. Drake watched them, wishing he could promise safety forever. But he knew better. The universe didn't forgive easily. Someone had sold them, and that someone would notice they were gone. Yet for now, in the small cabin of a broken ship, there was peace. A fragile, trembling peace, but peace nonetheless. Drake closed his eyes briefly, letting exhaustion weigh him down, and for the first time in a long time, he allowed himself a small smile. These girls were alive because he had chosen to act when reason said he shouldn't. And somehow, that made the universe feel a little less cruel. As the twin moons drifted across the sky, casting shadows over the rusty hull, Drake made a silent promise, not just to the girls, but to himself. "I will keep you safe," he whispered into the dark, "no matter what it costs." Outside, the scrapyard remained silent, but somewhere beyond the horizon, danger was stirring. They would come for the girls. They would come for him, and Drake Walker was already preparing, even in the quiet night, to face whatever came next. The morning sun rose over Halvern, turning the metal scrapyard into a harsh landscape of light and shadow. Drake Walker's body ached from sleeping on the cold floor of the Sparrow, and his hands were raw from working on the ship the night before. Yet he didn't rest. The moment he opened his eyes, he knew their freedom was fragile. The 3 cat girls were awake already. Neo sat cross-legged, quietly nibbling on a small ration bar. Tessa paced along the cabin wall, her tail twitching like a warning. Leary leaned against the hull, silver fur catching the dim light, eyes scanning the small viewport. Even here, in the cramped interior of a broken ship, fear lingered like a shadow. Drake rose and checked the console. The engines were patched enough to function, but just barely. One more blast of heat, one more push through space, and they could have fuel. But he didn't have enough credits to buy more, and the nearest station was controlled by the same people who sold the girls. They wouldn't be kind. He crouched next to Leary. "We need a plan," he said softly. "We can't stay here long. Someone will notice they're gone." Leary's ears twitched. "They'll come for us?" she asked quietly, almost afraid to hear the answer. Drake nodded. "Yes, and they won't be gentle." Neo's small voice trembled. We can't fight them," Tessa's orange eyes flashed. "Maybe we don't have to. Maybe we can run," Drake shook his head. "They'll track us. Drones, scanners, they won't stop until they find you." His hands clenched. He had seen it before. Slavers didn't forgive. They didn't negotiate. And they certainly didn't care about mercy. The girls looked at him, fear and helplessness in their eyes. Drake felt the weight of his own decisions crushing him. He had spent every credit he had risking everything for them, and now the universe demanded payment. He rubbed his face and spoke slowly. "I'll fix the ship. We'll get off this planet, but you need to trust me. You can't panic. You can't scream." "Not yet." Tessa crossed her arms, tail flicking. "And if they catch us?" Drake didn't answer immediately. He didn't want to scare them, but the truth was simple. If they were caught, none of them would survive. Then we fight or we run. Whatever it takes. But I promise you won't go back to them alive. Leary's silver ears twitched. She studied him, searching for any hint of doubt. Finding none, she whispered, "You're different from other humans." Drake gave a bitter laugh. Different enough to care when others don't. Hours passed. Drake worked on the engines, stripping damaged wires, patching old circuits, and risking sparks flying into the air. The girls helped where they could. Neo passed him small tools. Tessa held panels steady, and Leary tried to read the manual, even though it was written in technical jargon she barely understood. By midday, a warning flashed on the ship's console, a patrol alert. Red lights blinked, showing an approaching fleet heading their way. Drake froze. They were already coming. The people who had sold the girls weren't gentle traders, they were ruthless, and they had eyes everywhere. He turned to the girls. "Get ready. Soon we leave. We don't have time to hesitate." Neo's eyes filled with tears. "I don't want to go back." "You won't," Drake said firmly. His voice carried the weight of promise, of determination. "I'll make sure of it." Tessa's sharp eyes softened a little. She crouched near the hull and whispered, I trust you." Leary nodded, still quiet, but the trust in her gaze was real. Drake took a deep breath, gripping the console. The engines hissed and groaned under the strain of his repairs. Sparks flew and the metal floor vibrated with the first tentative hum of life. The Sparrow was waking. Outside, the scrapyard shimmered under the rising suns. Soon the patrols would arrive. Soon they would try to take the girls back. But Drake Walker was ready to risk everything, his life, his ship, his future, to make sure they were free. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine escape. Stars whizzing by, the girls laughing and safe, a universe that hadn't crushed them under its weight. But he knew it was only a glimpse, a dream. The real challenge had only just begun. As the girls huddled together, trembling yet trusting, Drake whispered almost to himself, "I can't fail them. I won't." And somewhere deep in the shadows of Halvorn, the slave traders sharpened their claws, unaware that their prey was already preparing to fly away. The engines of the Sparrow groaned and coughed as Drake worked feverishly, sweat dripping down his face. Sparks flew from patched circuits, but the ship hummed to life, its old metal body trembling under the strain. Outside, the patrols were closing in, their scanners sweeping the scrapyard with cold, unfeeling precision. Every second counted. "Is it ready?" Leary whispered, her silver ears twitching nervously as she clutched Neo's small hand. Drake didn't answer immediately. He ran one last check across the console, watching the energy levels spike and falter. The engines wouldn't last long under heavy flight, but they had enough to break through the city's atmosphere. Almost. Just a few more seconds. Neo's blue eyes were wide, filled with fear. They'll find us," she said quietly, her voice trembling. "They won't. Drake said firmly, though his jaw was tight. He had no guarantee, only hope, and the determination to protect these girls no matter what. Tessa crouched by the ramp, tail flicking in agitation. "They'll shoot. They'll hit us." Drake took a deep breath. "Then we run. Full speed. No hesitation." He slammed his palm on the ignition. The engines roared to life, shaking the entire hull. Sparks danced across the floor as the ship vibrated violently. Outside, the patrol drones whirred and alarm lights flashed across the scrapyard. "Go! Now!" Drake shouted. The girls scrambled aboard, fear and urgency driving their movements. Neo's small frame quivered as she clung to Leary, while Tessa scanned the perimeter, ready to defend them if necessary. Drake moved to the control panel, hands steady despite the chaos. The ship lurched forward, metal screeching against the ground. Sparks flew as the landing skids scraped along the junk-strewn earth. Red warning lights blinked violently on the console. Patrol drones hovered above, weapons charging. "Hold on!" Drake yelled, pushing the throttle forward. The ship leaped into the air, engines straining against gravity. The world below blurred into streaks of light and dust. Bolts of plasma fire struck the hull, rattling the metal and sending a shiver through the cabin. Neo screamed. Tessa grabbed her, shielding her from the sudden jerk of the ship. Leary leaned into the bulkhead, gripping tightly. Drake's eyes were fixed on the flight path, his mind calculating every movement, every possible strike. "Steady," he muttered. "Almost clear." A large drone swooped in, lasers aimed at the hull. Drake twisted the ship sharply, sparks flying as metal scraped against debris. The girls cried out but held on, trusting him, their faith fragile yet fierce. "Just a little further," he whispered to himself. Finally, the scrapyard fell behind them. The thick atmosphere of Halvern began to thin, and the red suns shrank in the viewport. Drake let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. We're flying!" Neo whispered, awe overtaking fear. Tessa's tail flicked in relief. "And we're alive." Leary turned to Drake, eyes wide. You saved us." Drake shook his head, exhaustion etched into every line of his face. "No, you saved yourselves. You trusted me. That's what matters." The girls were quiet for a moment, watching the stars begin to sparkle in the darkening sky. The hum of the engines filled the cabin, a rhythm of life, of escape, of hope. But Drake knew their journey was far from over. The traders who had sold the girls weren't merciful. They would track them, send ships, hire bounty hunters. Safety wasn't permanent. It was temporary, fragile, and hard-won. Still, in this moment, the three fragile beings were alive. The fear that had clung to them like chains was loosened, if only slightly. And for Drake, seeing them breathe freely, seeing them alive, made every risk, every lost credit, every sleepless hour worth it. He leaned back in his chair, letting the vibration of the engine soothe his tense muscles. Neo's small hand found his, gripping it with quiet gratitude. Leary rested her head against the bulkhead, eyes closed for the first time in days. Tessa's sharp gaze softened, and she finally allowed herself a small, weary smile. Drake looked out the viewport at the stars. Somewhere out there, danger waited, but for now, they were free. And in a universe that often seemed cold and cruel, that freedom felt like a victory. "Rest now," he whispered. "We fight tomorrow if we must. But tonight we live." The three catgirls huddled together, their trust in him slowly growing, fragile but real. And Drake Walker, once alone and broken, felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose. For the first time in a long time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could protect them. The stars stretched endlessly across the dark sky as the Sparrow floated through space, engines humming a steady rhythm. For the first time since leaving Halvern, Drake Walker allowed himself to relax slightly. The immediate danger had passed, and the three catgirls, Leary, Neo, and Tessa, were alive. Alive, and beginning to recover. Inside the ship, the cabin smelled faintly of metal and recycled air, but the small lights gave warmth to the cramped space. Neo sat cross-legged on the floor, brushing her gray fur and humming softly. It was a sound of comfort, a quiet thread of hope that reminded Drake why he had risked everything. Tessa, always watchful, had taken to inspecting the ship. She prodded at panels and buttons with her paws, orange fur glinting in the dim lights. "This ship, it's old," she said, voice tinged with curiosity. "But it works," Drake chuckled softly. "Old, yes, reliable. Just enough." He glanced at Leary, who had curled up against a small crate, silver fur catching the light. Her calm eyes studied the ship's systems, trying to understand, trying to learn. The days blurred together. Fuel and food were scarce, and Drake scavenged from abandoned stations along their route. Every small victory, finding fresh water, repairing a broken panel, keeping the girls safe, felt monumental. For the cat girls, each moment of safety was a miracle. For Drake, it was purpose, a reason to keep going when the universe had given him little else. At night, the three girls would gather together, and sometimes they would speak quietly. Neo asked about stars, about planets, about humans. Leary asked questions about systems and engineering, soaking in every answer Drake gave. Tessa asked about fighting and defense, her sharp mind focused on survival. Drake answered them all. Sometimes he didn't have answers. Sometimes he could only smile or nod. But each question, each curiosity was a reminder that they were alive, that they were more than the cages, more than the market, more than prey. One evening, Drake watched them huddled together in the dim light. Neo's small paw brushed Leary's tail as she rested her head. Tessa sat nearby, sharpening a small metal tool she had scavenged. And Leary? Leary looked at Drake with something he hadn't expected, trust. Deep, unwavering trust. He felt a lump in his throat. You're learning fast, he said softly. Leary's ears twitched. Because we have to, she said quietly. Because you saved us, Drake shook his head. No, you saved yourselves. You trusted me when the universe had left you nothing. That's what matters. The days passed with small routines, scavenging, repairs, lessons, laughter in small bursts. The girls' fur grew healthier, their eyes brighter, their movements stronger. Each moment was a victory, each small smile a light against the darkness of their past. But Drake never let himself forget the danger that trailed them. Somewhere out there, the traders who had sold the girls were planning, calculating, hunting. The thought kept him vigilant, restless. Every shadow, every signal ping on the scanner made his heart race. One quiet moment, Neo climbed onto his lap. Will they come back? She asked softly, eyes wide with fear. Drake held her close. Maybe, he admitted. But we'll be ready. We won't let anyone take you again. She rested her head against his chest, sighing. I feel safe now. Drake's heart tightened. That one sentence, simple as it was, held more weight than any victory in space. All the danger, all the fear, all the lost credits, all the sleepless nights, it was worth it. Tessa watched silently, her fiery eyes softened by relief. We're alive, she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. Yes, Drake said, voice low but firm. And we stay that way, together. For a few hours they sat like that, letting silence fill the cabin. It was a fragile peace, but a peace nonetheless. In the vast emptiness of space, with danger always looming, they had found a small sanctuary, and Drake knew that no matter what came next, he would fight with everything he had to keep it. Not just for himself, not just for the ship, but for the three fragile beings who had become his reason to live again. The stars outside twinkled endlessly, indifferent, yet beautiful. And inside the sparrow, hope began to grow, tiny and fragile, but real. Drake whispered into the quiet, almost to himself. We'll survive. Together. Always. The stars outside the viewport of the sparrow stretched endlessly, indifferent to the small lives inside. Drake Walker sat at the controls, eyes sharp, mind alert. For days they had been traveling through the outer sectors, scavenging fuel and food, avoiding patrols, staying one step ahead. But deep in the void, he knew danger was closing in. The scanners beeped urgently, a ship, massive and armed, emerging from the dark. Drake froze for a heartbeat. He recognized the emblem on the hull, the traders who had sold the girls. They had followed them, tracking every move, ready to reclaim their property. They found us, Tessa whispered, ears flattened against her head. Her tail lashed with tension, ready to strike if necessary. Drake didn't speak. He slammed the throttle forward, sending the sparrow jolting through space. The smaller ship groaned under strain, engines pushed beyond comfort. But it held. Leary's silver eyes widened. What do we do? She asked, voice trembling. Drake took a deep breath. We fight or we run, whatever it takes. Neo, trembling beside Leary, whispered. Will we survive? Drake looked at them, eyes hard but calm. You already survived worse. You will survive this too. Trust me. The trader's ship opened fire first, plasma bolts streaking through space, hitting the hull. Sparks and smoke filled the cabin. Neo screamed. Tessa grabbed her, shielding her small body. Leary gritted her teeth but stayed close, holding Neo's paw tightly. Drake twisted the controls, dodging, weaving. The smaller ship shuddered under the assault. Each moment was a knife edge between survival and destruction. "We need to use the escape pods," Drake shouted, though his heart ached. They were fragile, small, and not meant for long journeys, but it was their only chance. "No," Leary cried. "We stay together." Drake shook his head. "I promised to save you. If we separate, at least you live." Tessa's eyes widened in panic, but she saw the resolve in his. He opened the pod bay. Neo clung to him, her small body shaking violently. Leary followed, her silver fur glinting in the console lights. Tessa hesitated, then joined them, tail whipping. Drake watched them board the pods. "Go," he yelled. The pods shot out into the void, small lights blinking against the darkness. Drake steered the Sparrow directly at the enemy, engines screaming. He knew he couldn't outrun them. He couldn't survive this battle, but he could make sure the girls did. Plasma bolts tore through the hull, metal groaning under stress. Drake gritted his teeth, twisting the ship, dodging, striking back with whatever weak weapons remained. Every hit risked his life, but every second he delayed gave the pods more distance. Finally, he saw the pods disappear into the void, tiny dots of light moving away from danger. Relief and grief hit him at the same time. The girls were safe, but he might not be. He took a deep breath, gripping the controls. "Go down fighting," he whispered to himself. The Sparrow glowed under the enemy's fire, engines roaring as it became a shield and a weapon. Drake's vision blurred, sparks and smoke filling his eyes. Yet he held on, every movement precise, every decision focused on the girl's escape. And then, light exploded across the ship. The Sparrow shuddered violently, torn apart in a blaze of fire. In the pods, Neo clung to Leary, crying but alive. Tessa's eyes were wide, tears streaming as she whispered, He saved us." Leary held Neo close, looking out at the wreckage. Her voice trembled, but it was full of awe. "He didn't die for nothing. He gave us life. Freedom." The pods drifted silently through space. The trader's ship was far behind, unable to track them all. The three cat girls huddled together, hearts racing, breathing heavy but alive. And somewhere, in the cold void where the Sparrow had fallen, Drake Walker's final act had been complete. He had given everything he had, credit, safety, even his life, to save lives that were not his own. Years later, the three girls would build a sanctuary, a small colony at the edge of known space. They would tell stories to the children there, stories of bravery, sacrifice, and humanity, stories about the human who risked everything for them, who believed in hope when the universe had none to offer. Neo would teach compassion. Tessa would teach strength. Leary would teach wisdom. And every night, under the stars, they would look up and remember the man who had shown them the meaning of courage, of mercy, of being truly human. In a galaxy that often seemed dark and cruel, Drake Walker's legacy shone like a distant star, a reminder that even one life, one choice, one act of kindness could change everything. Because sometimes, the universe gives hope to the smallest and most fragile, and one human is enough to save them all.